I found a thin little notebook in the kitchen cabinet among Lucy's recipes. The entries in it looked recent and seemed to appear every week. Numbers, dates, as if someone was counting down the days to something important. It was a Thursday evening, early spring. The kind of evening that still holds onto the chill even as the days stretch longer. I remember it clearly because of the way the light hit the kitchen window, soft gold spilling across the sink, catching flecks of dust in the air like fireflies. That's how quiet our life was. I noticed the dust and sunlight. Lucy was washing dishes, her back to me. I was at the kitchen table, sorting receipts and bills, trying to make sense of a stack that never seemed to shrink. Our farm, our little dream, was hanging on by a thread. Feed costs were up, equipment needed repairs, and the crops hadn't been kind last season. Money was tighter than it had ever been. We weren't the type to talk about feelings much. We were doers, not dwellers. But I could feel something in the air that night, like when you walk into a room and know someone's just been crying, even if their face is dry. Lucy hummed to herself. She had this little tune she always went to, some old Fleetwood Mac song. But that night, it was different. She stopped mid-verse when she thought I wasn't paying attention. She dried her hands too quickly. Her phone buzzed on the counter, and she snatched it up like it might explode. Just texts, I told myself. Could be her sister. Could be anything. I didn't say a word. I looked at her from across the room and tried to read the small shifts in her face, the tension in her shoulders. Her eyes flicked to the screen. She smiled, barely, but it wasn't for me. She didn't know I was watching. The next morning, I drove into town to meet with Derek at the bank. We go way back. Same high school class, same little town. He took the college route while I stayed back to work the land, but we've always kept in touch. He stops by the farm now and then, says he likes the quiet. Whenever he's feeling burnt out, he knows there's always a hot cup of coffee waiting at our kitchen table. Lucy, him, and we all sat in the same classroom once. It's funny how life scatters people. So when I walked in his office, it didn't feel like walking into a bank. It felt like walking into a friend's place. He gave me a grin, clapped me on the back, even asked how the old tractor was holding up. But when I handed him my loan application, the friendliness slipped just a little. He flipped through the papers like he was skimming a magazine he'd already read. Then he looked at me, real calm, real polished, and said, "Sorry, Jim. It's not going to happen. It's just not going to work." No explanation. I asked. He shrugged, all business. It's just a no. I drove home with the windows down, hoping the wind would carry off the tightness in my chest. But it didn't. It only stirred things up. That night, Lucy made stew, her specialty. She kissed me on the cheek like she always did, laughed at one of my tired jokes, even rested her head on my shoulder while we watched the news. But something in me wouldn't quiet down. Later, I found her phone on the nightstand while she was in the shower. I didn't touch it, just looked at it like it was a snake coiled under a blanket. I didn't need to see anything. Not yet. Like I already knew something was off. I laid in bed, pretending to be asleep, when she crawled in beside me. She wrapped her arm around my waist and whispered, "Love you." I said it back, but my throat was dry, and the words caught a little before they came out. I stared at the ceiling long after her breathing went soft and steady. And I kept thinking, why would Derek say no? But little did I know then that this refusal was just the first link in a chain of events that would completely turn my life upside down. The days rolled on like they always did, one after the next, full of chores and early mornings, small talk and silence that stretched a little longer each night. I didn't say anything to Lucy about the loan. She didn't ask either. Just kissed me on the forehead when I came in from the fields and asked if I wanted dinner. I wanted to believe things were okay. God, I wanted to. That maybe I was just tired, too wound up over bills and banks and broken equipment. That maybe her glances at her phone, her little half smiles when she thought I wasn't watching, were nothing more than daydreams or something from a podcast she liked. But I didn't believe it. Not really. The knot in my gut kept tightening. The kind you can't shake with a cold beer or a good night's sleep. It was a Tuesday when it happened. Nothing special about the day itself. I'd spent the morning fixing the irrigation pump, had a sandwich around noon, then spent the afternoon laying down fertilizer in the west field. Sun was just starting to dip when I headed back toward the house in the old pickup, dusty and worn down to the bone. The engine rattled like a coffee can full of screws, hard to miss on a quiet road like ours. But as I crested the hill and the house came into view, something made me slow down. Derek's silver sedan was parked in front of the porch, gleaming in the last of the light like it didn't belong there. Too polished, too sure of itself, like it had a claim. I don't know what made me do it, but I let off the gas and coasted to a stop by the oak tree just before the house. Killed the engine. Sat there for a second, staring at that damn car. Then I stepped out, closed the door soft, and walked the rest of the way on foot, boots crunching quiet on the gravel. Didn't want them to hear me. Maybe I didn't want to believe what I already suspected. Maybe I just needed to see it for myself, without warning, without lies. I stepped onto the porch, slow, careful. The front door was cracked open, just barely, but enough. And through that sliver, I saw them. They were standing close. Too close. Derek was fixing the collar of his shirt, and Lucy was smoothing her hair in the mirror near the entryway. She looked nervous, no, giddy, like a teenager sneaking out to meet someone she shouldn't. I froze, heart pounding, stomach turning. I couldn't move, couldn't even breathe right. "I missed you," she whispered, reaching for his hand. "I missed you too," Derek said, brushing his fingers across her cheek. I backed up a step, ready to storm in, to yell, to scream, to demand an answer. But I didn't. Instead, I reached into my pocket, pulled out my phone, and hit record. Don't ask me why. Maybe I needed proof, for myself, for later. Maybe some part of me wanted to hear it again, just to believe it was real. Maybe I knew this wasn't just about a marriage. It was about everything. Our life, our land, the work, the struggle. All of it. That's when the tone changed. The sweet nothings dried up. "I told you it had to be this way," Derek said, his voice lower now, colder. He wouldn't have let go of this place. You know him. He's too proud. Too damn stubborn. "I know," Lucy said, without hesitation. No crack in her voice. No regret. My jaw clenched. I pressed my hand against the side of the house to steady myself. The wooden siding dug into my palm. "I had to say no," Derek continued. "The loan, if he got it, he'd keep running the place into the ground. This way, he has no choice. He'll have to sell." "To you," Lucy added. "To us," Derek corrected. "We'll fix it up. Start fresh. You and me." And she nodded. Just like that. As easy as saying yes to dessert after dinner. They didn't see me when they walked out. I stepped back into the shadows as they came down the porch steps. She was laughing at something he said, and he reached out and touched the small of her back like he owned her. They got into his car and drove off. I stood there for a long time after the dust settled. I didn't cry. I didn't scream. I didn't punch the wall, even though I wanted to. I just stood there, listening to the night come alive, the crickets starting their song, the wind rustling the leaves in the oak tree out back, the groan of the barn settling with the cooling air. I replayed the recording. Every word. It was like being gutted slowly. The woman I'd built a life with. The man I called a friend. And it wasn't just the betrayal. It was the planning. The calculation. The cold logic of it all. Like I was an obstacle. Not a person, not a husband, just something to be moved out of the way. What do you do with that kind of knowledge? What does a man do when the foundation cracks? Not from an accident, but from someone chiseling at it day by day, right under your feet. I didn't sleep that night. Lucy came home late. Said she was helping her sister with something in town. I nodded. Told her I'd already eaten. Didn't mention Derek's car. Didn't let on that anything was wrong. But everything had changed. She crawled in a bed like nothing had happened. Laid her head on my chest and sighed like she was exactly where she was supposed to be. My hand rested on her shoulder, motionless. I stared up at the ceiling again, but this time it wasn't with confusion or fear. It was with clarity, because now I knew the truth, and I wasn't going to just let it pass. I didn't yet know exactly what plan was forming in my head, but one thing I knew for sure. They would pay for this. Morning came slow. The kind of slow where time doesn't feel real, just this strange, quiet drift between the tick of the clock and the hum of thoughts you can't turn off. Lucy was still asleep beside me when the sky started to turn pale. Her breathing was soft, peaceful, like the night hadn't swallowed me whole. I lay there, staring at the ceiling, the light creeping in by inches. I didn't feel anger the way I thought I would. Not the kind that makes you punch walls, or throw things, or scream until your throat gives out. No, this was colder, heavier, like a weight pressing down on my chest, filling up every inch of space where trust used to live. I could have shaken her awake, demanded answers, made a scene, but I didn't. Instead, I watched the light shift across the room, listened to the sounds of the house waking up, the creak of old wood, the soft whir of the fridge, the birds outside announcing a new day like everything was fine. When Lucy finally stirred, she kissed my shoulder and asked if I wanted eggs. I told her I'd be out early, said I had to get a jump on the fencing repairs before the heat set in. She smiled, rolled over, and went back to sleep. I grabbed my boots and left without breakfast. The drive into town was quiet. I took the long route, past the field that used to be my father's, now overgrown and forgotten. I kept thinking about how quickly things fall apart. Not with a bang, but with a slow, quiet rot. The kind you don't notice until the whole thing caves in. I parked outside the law office just as they unlocked the door. Small place. Just a single-story building with faded blue shutters and a sign that read Marshall and Crane, family law. I'd driven past it 100 times before and never once thought I'd have to walk through those doors. Inside, it smelled like old paper and burnt coffee. The secretary, a woman named Gail with kind eyes and a voice that didn't match her sharp stare, offered me a seat and asked if I had an appointment. "No, ma'am," I said, "but I need to talk to someone. Today." It didn't take long. I wasn't dramatic about it. No long speech. No tears. I just laid it out plain and simple. I wanted to file for divorce. Quietly. I didn't want her served at work or cornered in public. I wanted it clean. Fast. Legal. The lawyer, a man named Crane, gray-haired, slow-talking, leaned back in his chair and studied me. "You sure you're ready for this?" he asked. I nodded once. "Been ready since last night." I showed him the recording. He didn't ask to hear the whole thing. Just the part where Derek said he denied the loan on purpose, and the part where Lucy agreed without so much as a blink. That was enough. We spent the next 2 hours going through paperwork, signing forms, filing motions. I let him know I wanted her removed from any access to the joint finances. The property, too. Everything tied to the farm. I'd earned it. Worked every inch of it. She wasn't getting a damn thing she didn't bleed for. Crane didn't argue. Just nodded and said, "We'll take care of it." By noon, I was back in my truck, folder on the passenger seat, hands shaking just slightly. Not for nerves, from the sheer weight of it all finally having a direction. Of course, it was the first time in days I felt like I was steering my own damn life again. When I got home, Lucy was outside, hanging laundry on the line. The breeze caught the edge of her dress, and for a split second, everything looked normal. The way it used to be. Sunlight, fabric, her humming something soft under her breath. She waved when she saw me. I waved back. That was it. I didn't say a word about the bank, or Derek, or the recording still sitting on my phone like a live wire. I walked past her and into the house, folded the folder away into the lockbox where we kept the land deed and my dad's old hunting license. Then I grabbed a bottle of water and headed back out to the barn. I spent the rest of the day working. Replaced the gate, fixed a broken hinge, swept out the hayloft. Kept my hands busy while my mind replayed everything again and again. Every time Lucy walked by, I smiled, asked her if she needed anything. She kissed me once on the cheek and said I was sweet. Sweet. God, if she only knew. That night, we sat on the porch together. She brought out lemonade, rested her feet on the railing, leaned her head against my shoulder like we were still something real. I listened to the crickets, counted the stars, She said something about wanting to repaint the kitchen. Asked what I thought about yellow. Yellow's fine, I said. She smiled and said, "You always go along with everything. That's what I love about you." And I smiled back. But in my chest, something had already broken loose. The days that followed were quiet. She didn't suspect a thing. Maybe she thought she'd get to keep both worlds, me and the farm, and Derek waiting in the wings. Maybe she thought I'd never notice, that I was just the quiet husband, too wrapped up in soil and seasons to hear the storm rolling in. But every day that passed brought me closer to the moment it would all come out. And I wasn't rushing it, because some things, some betrayals, they deserve more than just confrontation. They deserve consequences. Some mornings, I'd wake up and forget. Just for a second, I'd roll over and see Lucy sleeping beside me, the light creeping through the curtain, and I'd think everything was still intact. The farm, the marriage, the love. But then I'd remember. That 1 second of peace would shatter, and the weight would settle back in, heavy as wet soil. The truth had a way of wrapping itself around everything, like a root system under the floorboards, unseen but always there. I kept up appearances, went through the motions, fed the chickens, checked the irrigation, fixed the back fence again after the storm rolled through. Lucy kept up hers too. She'd hum while folding laundry, packed me lunches I didn't ask for, even brought out fresh lemonade while I was working in the barn one afternoon like nothing had changed. But it had, and now it was time to do something about it. The regional office of the bank sat 2 towns over, glass doors, shiny tile floors, and that overly chilled air that smells like printers and cologne. I walked in wearing my best flannel and cleanest jeans. No appointment, just a man with a job to finish. The woman at the front desk asked if I needed help, and I told her I needed to speak to someone in charge about a matter involving one of their employees, Derek Holloway. Her posture changed instantly. They brought me into a side office with frosted glass and poured me a cup of burnt coffee. I sat down across from a manager named Caldwell, balding, square-jawed, the type who looked like he'd rather be anywhere else. I handed him a printed transcript of the recording, along with a written statement. Then I pressed play on the audio. I didn't say much. Just let Derek's voice speak for itself. He won't let go of the place. Too proud. I had to say no. We'll buy it, you and me. And Lucy's voice. Soft. Steady. Unhesitating. I know. Caldwell leaned back slowly, eyes hard, jaw working like he was chewing glass. He didn't ask for a second listen. The conversation ended quickly after that. "Thank you, Mr. Thatcher," he said. "We'll handle it from here." 2 days later, Derek was gone. No formal announcement. Just a whisper in town. Something about personal misconduct, some line about conflict of interest. But the truth? The truth was written loud and clear in the letter they gave him. A recommendation that made sure no bank in the region would ever hire him again. That was the first piece off the board. The second came the next morning. Lucy was standing by the sink when the knock came. She had flour on her hands, had been baking something, maybe for me, maybe just to pass the time. She looked out the window and saw the man in the suit with a thick envelope in his hand. "Who's that?" she asked. I didn't answer. She opened the door, signed her name, and stared at the papers like they were written in a foreign language. Then she turned to me, eyes wide. "Jim, what is this?" "You know what it is," I said. Her hands were shaking. She looked down at the papers again, then back at me. This is a divorce petition." I didn't say anything. She stepped forward, voice cracking now, all that practice calm unraveling in real time. "Jim, wait. No, you've got this wrong. It's not what you think. It was a joke." I blinked. "A what?" "A joke," she repeated, stepping closer. "A ruse. It was supposed to be a surprise for your birthday. Derek and we staged that whole conversation to make you think he was denying the loan, but really, the plan was to approve it and surprise you. It was going to be this big thing. A gift." I watched her carefully. She was crying now, hands shaking, mouth trembling with practiced guilt. But I'd heard her voice that day. There was no laughter in it, no wink, no punchline waiting in the wings. "You're lying?" I said, quiet and calm. No, Jim, please, you have to believe me. I didn't mean for it to go this far. I heard you. I interrupted. I heard you agree. I heard the way you said it. You weren't joking, Lucy. There wasn't even a pause. You were ready to leave me in the dirt. She looked like she'd been slapped. Her mouth opened, but nothing came out. I stepped past her, walked into the kitchen, poured myself a cup of coffee like it was any other morning. And still, she stood there, holding the papers like they were a live wire. The days that followed were quiet, but not the peaceful kind. Lucy was still in the house, but the air had shifted. She didn't hum anymore, didn't ask about dinner, didn't bring lemonade or kiss my cheek in the morning. She cried sometimes, thought I didn't hear her, curled up in the laundry room or sitting in the truck out back. But I heard everything now. She tried to talk now, and then tried to explain, apologize, reframe. Each attempt felt more desperate than the last. Can we just talk, please? I made a mistake. Don't throw everything away over one stupid mistake. We built this life together, Jim. You can't just erase it. But I could. And I was. The papers had already been filed. The accounts had been closed. Her name removed from the deed. Everything locked down. The farm was mine now, not ours. One night, I came in late, hands blistered from a long day fencing the north boundary. Lucy was waiting in the dark at the kitchen table. She looked tired. Hello. I have nowhere to go, she said softly. I nodded, sat across from her, looked her dead in the eye. I didn't do this, I said. You did. She flinched. Then she whispered, do you still love me? I looked at her for a long time, and I realized I didn't know the answer. Not anymore. Or maybe I did, and I just didn't want to say it out loud. But even then, I couldn't have foreseen the unexpected blow that awaited me around the corner. A blow that would force me to rethink everything that had happened. The morning she left, the sky was the color of wet stone. Clouded over, still, heavy with the kind of silence that comes before a storm. But there was no storm, not anymore. Lucy stood at the threshold with 2 suitcases and a trash bag full of clothes. She wore the coat I bought her last Christmas, the one she'd once said made her feel elegant. It looked heavy on her now, like she was being swallowed by something she couldn't carry. You'll regret this, she said, eyes flashing, voice shaking. Maybe once I would have. Maybe in another version of this life. I'd have begged her to stay, tried to fix something that wasn't mine to fix. But that version of me died the moment I heard the truth echo through my phone speaker. I didn't answer her, just held the door open. She waited a moment, as if hoping I'd change my mind. Then she stepped through it. The door clicked shut behind her like the final nail in a coffin. And that was it. She was gone. Derek called a few days later. His voice cracked right out the gate, half panic, half pleading. Jim, listen, man. That was all a setup. It was supposed to be funny, a surprise. You were never supposed to hear that. Come on, you know me. I didn't say much. He rambled, kept trying to rewind time with his words. Said his job was gone. Said I'd ruined him. Begged me to go to the bank, to explain that it was just a misunderstanding, a twisted joke that went too far. But I'd heard the truth. Heard the calculation in his voice. The absence of hesitation in hers. They hadn't been joking. They'd been planning. So I didn't go back to the bank. I didn't send any letters. I didn't owe them that. Sometimes silence is the only justice you need. The house was quiet after she left. The kind of quiet that echoes. Every footstep, every creak in the floorboards louder than it should be. But over time, I started to like the quiet. I moved her things out one drawer at a time. Gave away the stuff I couldn't stand to look at. Burned a few old photographs in the fire pit out back. Kept 1 or 2 from the early days before everything turned sideways. Just as a reminder of what once was and what to watch for next time. The bed felt bigger without her, but not emptier. Funny, isn't it? How someone can be gone, and the space they leave behind still feels crowded. That passed eventually. So did the ache. Mostly. I got a new loan a month later. Different bank. Different man behind the desk. One who listened, asked real questions, looked me in the eye when he shook my hand. The money came through, and I poured it right back into the soil. Fixed the irrigation system for good. Bought new seed. Repaired the old tractor that had been on its last breath since fall. There were still hard days. Still mornings I woke up wondering what happened. But I'd step outside, smell the earth waking up, and remember, this was mine. Always had been. And now, finally, it was mine alone. I didn't tell many people what happened. Didn't need to. Some figured it out like folks do in small towns. A few offered sympathy. Others offered whiskey. I thanked them, but I didn't sit and cry into my boots. I had a farm to run, bills to pay, land that didn't care who broke my heart. I kept going. Not because I'm some kind of hero, just because I didn't know how to stop. Then, one morning, months later, I found an envelope in the mailbox with no return address. No stamp, either. Someone had driven it here and placed it there by hand. Inside was a picture of a baby, a newborn, wrapped in a yellow blanket, big eyes looking somewhere past the camera. Beneath the photo was a form, voluntary child support agreement, and a short note, written in Lucy's handwriting. This is your son. I hope one day you'll do what's right. My fingers went numb. I sat down on the porch steps and stared at the picture. There was no explanation, no proof, just a demand wrapped in sentiment. My chest tightened, not with anger, not right away, but with disbelief. The kind that settles low in your gut and won't let go. Was it true? Was it mine? I hadn't known about any pregnancy. No missed periods, no morning sickness. And if there had been signs, maybe I was too wrapped up in trying to save the farm and notice. Or maybe I hadn't been told. I looked at the baby again. Couldn't tell anything from the face. Babies all look like babies in those first weeks. Could have been mine. Could have been Derek's. Hell, could have been anyone's. The truth? It remains to be seen. That night, I sat at the kitchen table with the photo and the form in front of me. The same spot where Lucy used to roll out pie crust and talk about repaving the driveway or repainting the kitchen yellow. I thought I had won. Thought I had reclaimed what was mine and buried what was lost. But this was a curve I hadn't seen coming. I didn't know what to do. I didn't sign the form. Didn't throw it away either. Just folded it back into the envelope and slid it into the lockbox with the rest of the papers that changed my life. But I knew I'd have to come back to it. Then I remembered Lucy's notebook, the one filled with numbers and dates, like a silent countdown to something. When I checked the kitchen shelf where it always sat, the space was empty. I still work the land every day, still tend to it like it's part of me. Some days I catch myself humming. Other days I don't talk to anyone at all. But I don't mind it. I'm not angry. Just changed. This place, this farm, it's quieter now, but it's stronger. So am I. I'm still not a victim. Not even now. Whatever comes next, tests, proof, decisions, I'll face it the same way I faced everything else. With both feet planted in the dirt and my hands steady. I've seen enough to know who I am. I'm a man who's been broken and rebuilt. A man who knows when something's worth saving and when it's time to let go.